What's up, Yu-Gi-Oh players? This is the RJB0 coming at you on this lovely Tuesday evening, and welcome to the second video of the Taking Down the Top Tier series. Now, I realize that this video is a long time coming. It's very overdue, but that's because it's been very uncertain to me as to what the anti-meta looks like right now. Because, as you all know, for the last many formats, it was very clear what the anti-meta was. You had decks like Gravekeepers, which prevented use of the graveyard and used a lot of field control without a lot of special summoning. You had a lot of stun decks based around skill drain. You had TG stun, you had Kawaki Meru stun, you had Malefic stun, all sorts of things like that. And then, of course, you had your classic anti-meta stun beat-down slaughterfest deck that people were legitimately afraid of. In fact, it wasn't too long ago that that deck won a YCS. But recently, with the development of the format into favoring things like Rabbit and Inzektor and Windup, it doesn't apply so much to dragons, but it also applies to heroes. You've seen a lot of these cards that used to be feared anti-meta cards take a back seat. So I want to look at them and see what happened to these cards, and then talk a little bit later about, maybe in another video, about what the anti-meta looks like now. So, I'm going to start off with, of course, the king of the anti-meta, also known as the Thunder King, Rio. Now, Rio has had a long history of being one of the best cards in the game, if not the best card in the game. Because when plants were a big thing, when Dark World was a big thing, and for many formats before those, this card could stop the majority of plays, because it took away one of the most important aspects of the game, which is the search engine, and then also prevented things like synchro summons and exceed summons. So it was very good, not to mention the fact that it's a 1900 beater, so it was very difficult to get over. However, against Inzektors, and occasionally against Windups, depending on the kinds of outs that they have, this card has lost a lot of its playability. And this is especially true against heroes. I forgot to mention that. It is still good against Rabbit, because it prevents them from going into Logia first turn unless they draw into that Dark Hole or Smashing Ground or whatever, and they have to wait for a turn, which time you can set up some plays, make sure you get rid of some of their back row, you know, stuff like that. But, like against Inzektor, it's not that helpful because they just get rid of it before they special summon, and they don't really search until they get rid of it. Against Hero, it's mediocre. It keeps them from using Stratos and Duality and Rhoda, but at the same time, it's pretty easy for them to get around it with things like Gemini Spark. Against Dragon, it can be very useful. It prevents them from using Eclipse Wyvern's effect. Actually, it doesn't. I revise my statement. But you can negate that first summon with Light Pulsar Dragon or with the Red Eyes Darkness Metal, and it means that they probably have to overextend themselves, except for the fact that with the Light Sworn build, it's a lot easier for them to get rid of this card. It's also basically I forgot what I was going to say, but it is good against Windup. So that's Rio. The next card is Doom Caliber Knight, another card that used to be very feared in the meta, because this was before hand traps were a big thing. This was before people main decked 3 Veiler and 3 Max C. Because now, with 3 Veiler being a very common thing, it's very easy to get around this card. However, it is still very good in decks that use skill drain a lot, because you don't work with their effects much, and then your opponent sides out their Veilers, and you side this guy in, and they've lost their out for one of the most powerful anti-meta cards in the game. So yes, still very good if you can get around the problem with hand traps. Another card, this is another one of the ones that I think has kept its value a lot, which is Fossil Dinah. Because you can, normal summon this against Rabbit if you have the protection and they can't go off if their Rabbit plays, or you can set it and then when they run it over with Logia, Logia will get destroyed because they can't negate its effect with Logia. This is also true for dragons. If you can normal summon it and protect it against dragons, then they can't really make a whole lot of plays. Other than that, it isn't going to be able to, it's not going to serve as much of a purpose as it could, except for in wind-ups, I suppose. I keep forgetting about wind-ups because they are losing a lot of their playability with the loss of priority. That's hurting them a lot, especially with the rise of Dragon and Inzektor. But it is still a deck out there, and this card can still work very well against it. But once again, it's mediocre against Hero and against Inzektor. Now, the cards that I think have seriously declined in value. First, Gale. Gale is basically useless this format because of the popularity of Valor, and the fact that most decks that are going to be worried about Gale, which is not a whole lot of them, have a lot of outs for it. In Rabbit, you see things like Fiendish Chain, and they've got 3 Valor, and then they've got their Logia, and they've also got warnings, so this card isn't a big deal. Against the decks that don't have outs for this card, like Dragon, this card, Dragon has the Swarming ability, which means that if you take out one of their Dragon's attack points with Gale, they're just going to bring it back next turn, and you don't get a whole lot out of that. Hero, I think, is the one deck that is still hurt by Gale, because they usually focus on getting one monster out at a time, except for the fact that they main deck 3 Skill Drain most of the time. So, that's, it makes Gale much less useful than it used to be. Then there's Grand Mole, which once again, I think the only deck that it's useful against right now is Hero, because Rabbit is going to have a ton of outs for this card, and all the other decks could care less about it. Cyber Dragon. Now, Cyber Dragon isn't that useful yet. Come Abyss Rising, this card will be an amazing anti-meta card, because you will see people running the Girgi archetype, and that is very hurt by Cyber Dragon and the Chimera Tech Fortress Dragon. So I'd say collect these cards while you can, because it's going to become much more popular when Abyss Rising comes out. So, having said what the anti-meta used to look like, what does it look like now? I think there are 2 cards in the current format that are very anti-meta and very helpful in the anti-meta. I think if you're going to try to take down the top tier, these are your 2 cards to play. They are Macrocosmos and Skill Drain. Now, Macrocosmos hurts a lot of decks this format. It doesn't hurt Rabbit, unfortunately, but it hurts Dragon, and it hurts Inzektor, and it hurts Windups, and it can kind of hurt Hero. There's a problem with it, which is that it can be warninged. There's also a lot of back row hate this format, but if you can manage to keep this card, it is fantastic anti-meta against the majority of decks right now. Then there's Skill Drain. Skill Drain is the MVP of the anti-meta this format. It takes out basically everything against Dark World, because Rabbit decks are useless. Inzektor decks are useless. Dragons have issues with this card on the field, and if you use it at the right time against Hero, it can be a problem. Hero, however, the reason why I think Hero is the anti-meta deck of the format is because it can main deck this card without worrying about it. and it can main deck this card, or it can side deck this card, and work around it. But at the same time, it also shows the hallmarks of being an anti-meta deck. It relies on big level 4 beaters, and 1-for-1 cards, and a control aspect, and not a whole lot of special summoning. However, there are also still decks that are perfectly valid that can run Skill Drain and Macrocosmos. I'm thinking Malefic Stun and TG Stun. Now, TG Stun has issues using Macrocosmos because in order to get their searching effects off, which are the most important part about TG Stun, they have to go to the graveyard. But Malefics are not hurt at all by either Skill Drain or Macrocosmos, and they can run Rio. They can run Doom Caliber. They can't really run Fossil Dinah, but other than that, this deck, I think, has so much potential, and I know that I rant about this deck, or I rave about this deck a lot, but I think it has the potential to be a very, very powerful anti-meta deck this format. So that is the second video of taking down the top tier. I hope you found it informative, and tomorrow will be my latest deck review. And until then, this is the RJB0 signing out.